Good afternoon, students. Today, our topic is cryptography and network security. So, before going to the cryptography and network security, first we can discuss about what is cryptography and what is the network security. So, what is cryptography? So, cryptography is the art or science. So, cryptography is the art or the science that provides different principles and methods to convert a plain text into the ciphertext. So, here what is the ciphertext? Ciphertext is the unintelligible format. So, what is cryptography? Cryptography is the art or science encompassing the principles and methods of transforming a plain text message into unintelligible form, then retransform that message back to its original form. So simply what we told, cryptography is the process of encrypting and decrypting the data. So what is the encrypting? So encrypting is converting plain text message into ciphertext message. So it is called the encrypting. What is the decrypting? So decrypting is the converting ciphertext into the plain text. So cryptography is the process of converting plain text message to ciphertext message. Similarly, ciphertext message to plain text message. So we can see the diagram. For example, this is the plain text. So plain text contains the message that is in the readable format. Now this plain text is converted into the ciphertext by using the concept of the encryption. So already we know encryption convert plain text message into the ciphertext message. The ciphertext message is in the non-readable format. That means the ciphertext contains the data that is in non-readable format. So the humans cannot understand that data. Now the ciphertext is converted into the plain text by using the concept of the decryption. So decryption convert ciphertext into the plain text. So the ciphertext contains the non-readable format that will be converted into the plain text that is readable format by using the concept of the decryption. So this is about cryptography. So what is cryptography? Cryptography is the process of encrypting and decrypting the data. So this is the cryptography definition. Now we can see what is network security. Next we can see what is network security. So network security provides different concepts to protect the computer networks and its resources from unauthorized access. So network security refers to the how we can protect the computer networks and its resources from unauthorized access. Similarly, misuse of the networks, similarly modification of the networks or destruction of the networks. So network security protect our computer networks. So the main goal of the network security is prevent the unauthorized access to network resources. We have the number of network resources, all are protected. So that means the network resources can be accessed only by the authorized users. So our network resources not able to access the unauthorized users. So the main goal of the network security is it will protect the network resources from unauthorized users. So this can be achieved by using the concepts of firewalls, intrusion detection, access controls, encryption and virtual private networks. So using these concepts we can provide security to our network. We can see later how we can provide the security to the network. So this is the network security. Now we can move to the first concept of cryptography and network security. The first concept is the security attacks. That is the concept in the cryptography. So what is attack? So what is attack in the computers? So the attack means the attacker try to gather our data in unauthorized way. So that is the attack. We can see the definition in computer and computer networks. An attack is any attempt to destroy, alter, disable, steal or gain unauthorized use of an asset. So attacker simply trying to access our data in unauthorized way. Here we have the two types of attacks. So based on the action performed by the attacker, we have the two types of the attacks. One is the passive attack, second one is the active attacks. So what is attack? Attack is the gain access or access to our data in unauthorized way. Here we have the different types of the attacks. Now we can see one by one what is the passive attack and what is the active attack. So the passive attacks are simply monitoring our data. So the attacker simply gathering our data. So the passive attacks are in the nature of eavesdropping on or monitoring of the transmission. So in passive attacks, the attacker simply listening what is going on during data transmission. So the main goal of the opponent, the main goal of the attacker is to obtain information that is being transmitted from one person to the another person. For example, consider we have the two computers, host A. Similarly, we have another computer, host B. So between the host A and host B, data is transmitting. So host A send data to the host B. Similarly, host B send data to the host A. Here the attacker, the passive attacker silently listening the data, silently watching the how data is transmitted between the host A and host B. So this is the passive attacks. Again, in the passive attacks, we have the two types. One is the release of message contents and the second one is the traffic analysis. So we can see what is the release of the message contents and what is the traffic analysis. So the main purpose of the passive attacks is simply gathering our information. So this is the passive attacks. Now we can see the active attacks. In active attacks, the attacker modify our data. So for example, consider host A and host B. Now the attacker receives the data from host A and modify that data and send that data to the host B. Similarly, the attacker receives the message from the host B and modify the data and send that message to the host A. So the active attack means the active attacker alter the system resources. Here, the active attacks involve some modification of the data stream or creation of the false stream. So, in the passive attacks, the attacker simply gather the information, but in the active attacks, the attacker modify our data. So, this is the passive attacks and active attacks. So, in the active attacks, you have 4 types. One is the masquerade attack, second one is the replay attack, third one is the modification of messages, and the fourth one is the denial of service. So, in the passive attacks, we have the 2 types. Release of the message contents, the second one is the traffic analysis. In the active attacks, we have the 4 types. One is the masquerade, replay, modification of messages, and denial of service. Now we can see one by one what is the release of message contents and what is the traffic analysis. So we can see one by one. First one, release of message content. So release of message content is the passive attack. So we know the passive attacker simply silently gathering our information. So for example, consider a telephone conversation between the 2 parties, or email messages between the 2 parties, or a transferred file that contains the sensitive information between the 2 parties. Now the attacker enter into our conversation, simply gathering the information. So here the main purpose of the release of message contents is the attacker simply gather what is the conversation between the 2 parties. So here we would like to prevent the opponent from gathering the information during the transmission. So for example, we can see here we have the 2 persons. Bob is the 1 person and Alice is the 1 person. So Bob and Alice making a data transmission. Now here Dart is the attacker. So Dart simply read the contents of messages from Bob to Alice. So here the Dart is the attacker simply reading what is the conversation between Bob and Alice. So this is the release of the message contents. Now we can see the traffic analysis. So in the release of message contents, we are not providing any protection to our data. So we cannot encrypt our data. So the attacker simply gathering our data. So in the traffic analysis, we had a way of masking to the contents of the message. Here we can provide encryption concept to our message. So already I told you how we can provide the masking to the contents using the encryption. So using the encryption, so encryption means what is encryption? Encryption converting the plain text into the ciphertext. Already we know the ciphertext is non-readable format. So the attacker not able to extract our information from the message. So even though we apply the encryption protection to our data, the attacker observe what is the pattern of the messages. So even though we apply the encryption protection to our data, the attacker observe the pattern of the messages. So the opponent, the attacker simply determine the location and identity of the communication host and observe the frequency and length of the messages being exchanged. So the opponent observe the traffic analysis between the two parties. So by using the traffic analysis, the attacker guessing the nature of the communication that was taking place. So by analyzing the traffic, the attacker try to convert the ciphertext data into the plain text data. Now we can see the diagram for this traffic analysis. So this is the diagram for the traffic analysis. Here again we have the two persons, Bob and Alice. So between the Bob and Alice, we maintain the encryption process. So during the data transmission, Bob encrypt the data and transfer the data to the Alice. So the Darth simply observe the pattern of the messages. What is the pattern of messages means how many messages are sent from Bob to Alice. What is the length of the messages, how many words containing in each messages. Next, what is the frequency of the characters. All these analysis is done by the attacker. Now by observing all these patterns, the attacker try to gather our information. So this is the traffic analysis. Now we can see the masquerade. What is masquerade? So masquerade is the one type of the active attack. So here the active attacker used the identity of the authentic users. So the active attacker uses the identity of the authentication users and he breaks communication and behaves like a authentic user and grabs our data. So for example, we have the two persons, Bob and Alice are connected. They are transferring the data to each other. Here Bob and Alice are the genuine persons. Here the attacker Darth theft the Bob identity. So the attacker, the Darth gather identity of the Bob. Now Darth communicate with the Alice, but the Alice treats that the communication is from the Bob, not from the attacker. So here the Darth communicates with Alice as a Bob. So in this case, the Alice treats that the messages are coming from the Bob, not from the attacker. So in this way, the attacker steals our identity. So by using our identity, the attacker try to communicate with other persons and he gather the information during the network transmission, data transmission. So this is the masquerade. Now we can see the replay attack. So replay attack is also a one type of the active attack. So here we know what is replay. Replay means again transmitting the data. So here the attacker fraudulently repeated or delayed the data. So in the replay attack, the attacker fraudulently repeated or delayed our data. So that means the attacker first simply gather our information. That means replay involves the passive capture of the data unit. Already we know what is passive capture. The attacker silently gather our information and later he retransmit the data to another person to produce the unauthorized effect. For example, Bob and Alice are maintaining the communication. Now the attacker Dot capture the messages from the Bob. Later or sometime after some time he resend that messages to the Alice. Alice thought that the messages is coming from Bob. So in this way the attacker retransmit the data to the other parties. So this is the replay attack. Now we can see the modification of messages. So the modification of messages. So the attacker gather our information and modify or alter our data and send that data to the another person. Here we have the two persons, Bob and Alice. Bob and Alice are maintaining the communication. Now the Dot is the attacker. So the Dot read the data from the Bob and modify that message and transfer that message to the Alice. For example, suppose Bob sent a message to Alice, transfer 10,000 amount to some other person. Now the Dot receive that message and modify that message, just like transfer 1 lakh rupees to some other person. So in this way the attacker modify the message and send that message to the Alice. Now Alice transfer 1 lakh rupees to the said person by Dot. So this is the modification of messages. So in the modification of messages the attacker modify the data. And the last attack is the denial of service. So what is the denial of service? In this the attacker send lot of requests to the server to increase the traffic. So in the denial of service the attacker send a lot of requests to the server to increase the traffic. So if the server receives lot of requests, then it will take time to respond to the genuine request. So whenever server receives the lot of requests, so it will take more time to respond to the genuine users. So in this way the attacker increase the traffic on the server and he can slow down the server. So whenever the server is slow down, the authentic users will not get the response from the server very fastly and the service is slow down. So this is the denial of service. So what is the denial of service? In the denial of service the attacker send more requests to the server. Now the server cannot able to handle the more request. So in this case the server not respond to any one. Why? Because the server is slow down. So now we can see the example for the denial service. So here we have the Dot is the attacker. We have the server. Here the Dot send lot of requests to this server. That means the Dot try to destroy the server. So in this case the server not able to provide request to anyone. So this is the example for this is the diagram for the denial of the service. So these are the two types of the attacks, passive attacks and active attacks. So we have the two types of the passive attacks. One is the release of the message contents, and the second one is the traffic analysis. The active attacks are the four types. One is the masquerade, replay, modification of the messages, and denial of the service. So this is about the service attacks. So the students, I will ask some questions. So try to complete the questions. What is cryptography? That's the first question. And what is the network security? Second question. What is the passive attack? Third question. And what is the active attack? What are the types of the active attacks? What are the types of the passive attacks? So thank you.